Let me first start with some introductions of our panel experts. First with Bruno. Bruno is an adjunct professor of business law and legal management, as well as director at the Executive School of Management, Technology, and Law with the University of St. Gallen. Bruno's career spans academia, in-house corporate legal, and the law firm environment. Lon is currently counsel with Anderson & Krieger, a Boston law firm. He has a long career in both the private and public sectors. He served as general counsel for almost 2 decades, split between Boston Consulting Group, the international strategy consulting firm, and BJ's Wholesale Club, a large US value retailer. He also served as general counsel to the governor of Massachusetts in the US. I'm going to just jump in and lead off by asking both Bruno and Lon for a few perspectives to kick off the dialogue. You have articulated a definition of efficiency versus what you call effectivity, which speaks to the value that end users place on legal services versus the inputs to provide that service. What's the value in particular that end users expect when securing legal services?
Efficiency is actually a relative factor because it measures input and output, and this leads then to a value which you may call efficient or non-efficient. So I thought that it might be, for the understanding of the term which we regularly use actually in our daily business all the time, to have kind of opposite terms to show what it is. And I use efficiency on the one hand side and effectiveness on the other side. On the one hand, we have cost and investment we put into the production of something, let's call it legal advice. So this is the input side. The output side, which will then be received by a customer, is then the output side, which less looks into what has flown into the production, but more in what the customer receives. Let's call it value or output or actually impact which a customer is looking for. So we have input on the one hand side, we have output on the other side, and we can allocate actually also 2 groups of the contract process to these 2 terms. Lawyers usually look into effectiveness. They are trained to do everything which they can do to achieve the result that they provide a correct, complete advice to the customer. Customers, however, they take this as granted actually, because they expect that lawyers provide excellent, good, and in particular, correct advice. So they rather focus on the efficiency element because they know I receive it anyhow, but I would like to take the chance to reduce the cost I will have to invest into that. So this is a little bit the outline I wanted to give here. And as an example, it's the evergreen, which is the billable hours. Billable hours actually means at the very beginning that the service provider says, I don't know how long it takes. Second, the provider says, well, it will take whatever it takes, and I will use everything what I can. And third, which actually should be written in high commas, is I don't really care how much it's going to cost as long as I provide you this effective value, which I understand as being the complete right advice I would like to provide you.
Thanks, Bruno. That is kind of the classic tension between the inputs and the outputs, and sort of differing expectations of the players along that value chain. Lon, please add any thoughts you have on Bruno's perspectives here. You've spoken about how legal sourcing functions have disintermediated. Can you elaborate on this a bit more?
Thank you. I agree with Bruno to start. I think there is tremendous tension. The tension is even made more complex by 2 things that you outlined. One is the different players along a spectrum. I mean, if you take a paradigmatic case of days of old, when a general counsel would hire an outside law firm and they would send 1-line bills for services rendered, there was a lot of mystery in the black box. If you add to that paradigm, on the one hand, a sourcing function, on the other hand, a more activist set of clients in the company, say the CFO, as Bruno points out, people want different things. And then you add on the law firm side a bit of a disintermediation of the provision provision of legal services. People need to continue to think in innovative ways to get the right legal answer, which is what the client is always seeking and needs, and at a value that respects that the company's ultimate motive is a profit motive, and in such a profit motive, reasonable cost control is an important part. And I think when you look to the pyramid of legal services that had provided between law firms that used to do all of it by throwing large teams of people at projects, starting with senior partners who generally speaking brought the wisdom, and at the bottom of the pyramid, a lot of young attorneys and paraprofessionals who brought the manpower. When you look at that in a way now where there are layers of providers, routine services on the one hand, implementation of the IT and AI components on some of the discovery type matters, then you have teams of people that can come in for projects at a very high level, need to put together all of those pieces, which is the great value of the procurement function in helping the general counsel do that. You need to put together all those pieces in a way that solves the paradigm that Bruno mentioned to the greatest extent possible.
Yeah, that is the current theme here. In recent times, there's been a lot of focus on sort of the growing landscape of legal services providers. You know, the premise has been now that if you look at the kind of previous duopoly of sort of in-house counsel and law firms, the premise has been that that duopoly has been systematically changed over the last number of years. This article about taking the alternative out of the alternatives, the thesis is that the word alternative actually inhibits and understates the full significance of major changes that are going on in the market, and that this is now the mainstream model where customers and clients demand these integrated solutions that bring kind of the best of multiple players across the market. Do you believe that a model where legal sourcing buyers, that role now morphs into a role where value can be gotten by actively driving collaboration, not just sort of waiting for it to happen or hoping it will happen and letting the industry figure out ways of collaborating, but actually having the end client and the legal sourcing buyer as part of that demanded any perspectives on the key success factors to actually make this happen?
Well, I think the interesting use of the phrase alternative is right on point. I mean, they used to call something alternative dispute resolution, and all the people who were in that business said, why should we be alternative? We should be the best way to resolve. When you go from a state where you have when you have full complete packages on both sides of your duopoly, there's some sort of efficiency, you think, because you can't look anywhere else, and that's the way that it plays. When you break up the value package that used to be delivered by law firms, or particularly by law firms, into pieces, it puts more stress on the procurement folks and the general counsel function and the business functions in the companies, because you can't pick up the phone and make one call. But in the old expression, the sum being greater than the parts, I think that wise assembly of the right kind of team for the right kind of project is harder initially, but can be add much greater value for the company clients and even and for the general counsel function if you put the time and effort against it. And I think it's the growing experience of people in the in-house world and in the procurement world in assembling these virtual teams that will allow it to happen. I assume the first time a person does it, it's very uncomfortable and very difficult. But as the providers become more nuanced and as their skills become more known and as people get more confidence in their ability to deliver, as we get to that point in time, if we're not there already, we'll be in a better shape than when one general counsel called one senior partner and said, this is my problem, please help.
Thanks, Lon. Bruno, did you have a perspective?
Let me start with the term alternatives. We have to be a little bit careful when we just throw terms into a discussion, and I would like to distinguish it a little bit. I use the term alternatives, but only for the purpose when I try to easily categorize the providers, which means and I understand there are three big categories in the market. One is the law firms. Second is the legal departments. I call them the traditional legal services providers. And the third is just the alternatives to these two traditional ones. So this is without any bias, just to have three boxes. However, when we talk about the quality of services, what they are able to deliver, then they are equal. So they are same significant into the market. The so-called alternatives, they have a justification as the law firms have and the legal departments have. So as long as we distinguish that, I think I am fine personally. I have some sympathy that you don't like the term alternatives, but it's easier to box it and to play around with them. When you now ask for collaboration, what it means for the customer, then we have to be careful, because one legal service provider, which is the legal departments, they are actually the customer itself. They play a role therein. So they have the bigger responsibility actually to take care that the alternative providers have a saying in the market, because they are directly challenging actually the procurement department, the primary procurement department of legal services. So when you ask now what are the key success factors to make it happen that the end customer, the company, gets the best, more productive, most efficient service actually at the end, legal service, then we have to make sure that the legal departments in particular are incentivized in a way that they are interested in buying these services from the alternative providers in a way that doesn't actually limit their power, their budget, reduce maybe the FTs they have. You know, these are all human elements which go to a general counsel. So as long as they are incentivized, I think they are on a better shape to make it happen than law firms when we talk about these three groups.
I'll just throw out a few examples that I've seen in the market. There's one very, very well known and very highly publicized technology company that in essence sponsors a competition among its panel firms each year around specific use cases. And by that I mean the company themselves will specify some number of business problems that they would like solved. And they're fairly defined. They publicize the results, it's very transparent. And the key success factor is that the client themselves plays the integrator role of bringing multiple, both panel firms, as well as some of the non-law firm partners that this firm works with. Another example I'll throw out is one that we are involved in. It's a situation with a PE firm is doing a number of serial large financing transactions, with some repeatability and kind of common levels of activity. But the end client was in a position where their capital was being spent on legal fees as opposed to actually investing in the market. And they were being constrained in terms of the number of financing deals that they could actually do. So in this particular case, the law firm was motivated to find a way to get categories of work done in a more efficient way than what they could do. And Lon, it kind of gets to your point about rethinking the pyramid of work. Where this has kind of evolved to is that the law firm will continue to handle master agreement negotiations, legal opinions. They'll be, of course, available to advise on complex legal issues and ultimately be responsible for closing the transactions and managing the risk of those transactions back to the client. But what they have in essence outsourced is managing data rooms, diligencing the financing documents, preparing schedules, other deliverables, and so forth. And so it's become kind of a really interesting collaboration in somewhat of in a scalable manner and a repeatable manner, but it wouldn't have come to fruition without the client articulating the specific use case and the win-win-win across the board, which is they get to do more financing transactions. The law firm gets to do far more advisory functions on an increasing volume of deals. And then an alternative provider comes into the mix to do, some of the standard repeat work that, might not be obvious coming into these things.
So I just wanted to have a brief reaction to that, and I'll probably get kicked out of some local bar associations for this, but I think a lot of the root of the evil of some of this is around the notion of billable hours, because wisdom can be so much more valuable than even the highest big law firm rate of a billable hour. I remember when I was at Boston Consulting Group, we had a very, very complex transaction. It was a big project, needed lots of lawyers at lots of places, and it was before there was as many layers of outside professional services firm. And I remember being in some meetings with some international finance types. And honestly, the 2 hours with those folks were worth an enormous amount of value. The wisdom they could bring at the very top, just as I think of the picture of the pyramid, not relative worth, but just top was so valuable. And some of the other things that they would have their junior lawyers do at seemingly ridiculous rates for hundreds of hours were so less valuable. So I think when you think broadly and unconstrained from some reality about how the industry should evolve, the idea that the value has to be captured in a metric that has to do with 60 minutes is a constraint for everyone. I don't have a solution as to how to deal with it, but value is really unconstrained to time.
Absolutely. A question from the audience. This is the central theme of today's discussion. What are Lon and Bruno's suggestion for increasing productivity and efficiency?
Well, when we look into efficiency as a relative term, again, unfortunately, I try to always, I need a simple world for me so I can better allocate actually my arguments. When you would like to increase efficiency, you have two ways. Either you work on the output or the upside, or you work on the cost side to increase efficiency. That means if, as a law firm, for example, you would like to increase efficiency and you understand efficiency in terms of internalizing the efficiency gain, and you look only for you to increase the profitability, then you have to find ways to bill more in terms of US dollars, or you have to reduce the cost element. The profit and loss statement is pretty simple. You have just two sides. And there you can then increase the internal productivity actually and deliver the same advice outside. However, if you would like to, for example, to increase your USP in the market and to show your customer that you can deliver more for the same amount you have provided so far, then you have to find ways to deliver to the customer more value. Or in the eyes of the customer needs to understand that the customer receives more value in terms of maybe more services, more support you can deliver for the customer. Maybe you have more or different service elements you can provide in terms of support in legal tech or support in, as we hear sometimes, in terms of project management. Or nowadays, we have heard about law firms providing actually advice on operations. We should just try to understand where you would like to achieve the efficiency gains and then just balance in and out.
One of the striking observations that jumped out at me in the 2020 Thomson Reuters Georgetown report on the state of the legal market was about the growth in professionals in law firms in roles such as the COO, the CTO, and technology-related functions, and so forth. The trend to leverage these roles in client-facing capacities for expertise in areas such as project management, legal operations consulting, technology adoption, different ways of thinking about pricing, that was a notable trend. Is it in fact translating into direct efficiencies, into new ways to think about productivity and effectiveness, ultimately within the end user community?
It's not an area where I have differential expertise, but I do think that the idea of serving clients has evolved over time, and it's important to meet clients where they live, so to speak. I mean, just wrapping up the legal advice in a nice package and leaving it on the front door doesn't really get the legal advice received or implemented the way it should. So whether it's through a project management assistance in a big project or a technological assistance in a big project, I can understand how including in the package of law firm, those items in the package of law firm services makes perfect sense for both the client and the law firm. You have to figure out, again, the business model and the P&L around that. If mostly you're charging billable hours as opposed to project fees, it really affects, and who you can bill time for, it really affects the commercial relationship with the client. But I think as law firms expand their services in a way that makes their advice land better in the clients, it must be a good thing.
The distinction between the non-legal professionals in a law firm and the legal staff is interesting actually to see how operations have developed and evolved now to get a bigger footprint actually in the law firm. And it makes sense for the law firm itself. So what does it mean if you get experts in things which are not legal work into the company? It means that you free up the resources which were bound by highly paid lawyers who could then better be allocated actually to hourly billing work. So for the first thing. Second thing is all the non-legal work can be done now much more efficient because experts in this area can focus on that. So when we talk about efficiency gains, this is actually something where the law firm can increase actually their own profitability without passing it through to the customer. If this helps in organizing the law firm a little bit better in terms of maybe having less time used up to find documents or to talk to each other and so on, and the total amount of hours on a project gets reduced, which is of course in the first sight a loss of revenue. However, if this leads to a higher satisfaction of the customer, then you can pass it through to some extent and work on the retention of the customer, which secures actually the tomorrow's revenues you have. So for me, it makes sense to scale up operations, to have a direct impact on your own profit and loss statement, and on top to have a substantial, hopefully substantial impact also to the customer. Effectiveness is not changed. So the legal advice still needs to be correct, of course, you are delivering, but maybe to a different price tag.
Where do you see the biggest potential for increased efficiency in a typical in-house legal department? What are the quick wins that you might be seeing?
I think the place to always go first to look at that is when things become routine. When I worked for the large retailer, had many employment lawsuits. When I originally came, we had used those as an outside counsel function, but they could just not do those things anywhere near as cost effective, no matter what arrangement I crafted with them, as I could do internally. And even when I looked, in that case, at that time, when I looked for outside providers, I couldn't provide an outside provider that could do it as fast. I think the way to get efficiencies is to find things that have critical mass and then find the best opportunity to get them done for the lowest price, and to continually search for things that have critical mass and that can be grouped in a way that they can either be done by I'll say non-traditional instead of alternative, a non-traditional legal provider, by a law firm, or by your own staff in-house, because you have a volume that can support the expertise.
Fully agree, Lon. So we are in a crisis. When you are in a crisis and you have to make quick impact actually on your budget, then there is honestly only one way to do it. You have to work on the bottom line. And bottom line means in a legal department that you have actually 4 possibilities to reduce your cost you have. One is on IT, which means the electronic workplace. You can't do anything there. You need your laptop to continue, actually even more now when we have to work home office now at home. Then second is the logistic workplace. You can't get out of rents very quickly or squeeze more lawyers in a room. Again, today it would maybe not be advisable to do it anyhow. And then you have the 2 remaining parts, which is salary and outside counsel cost. These are the biggest 2. Now, if you would like to be a nice guy as a general counsel, you make sure that you don't upset your own people. What you could do, of course, is fire people or at least reduce the salaries, as we have seen is being done in law firms. Then what remains is then the last one, which is outside counsel. And there you have 2 levers. That means either you renegotiate prices, and second is you reduce the workload, which we understand is being called insourcing. So you just send less out. And you just pull the work on your remaining people in-house, or you try at the same time to renegotiate terms with outside counsel. In terms of crisis, we have to understand that some exceptional behavior may be understandable. The golden rule is actually in communication. Depends on how you convey the message. You may save certain relationships, which applies also in-house, by the way.
Bruno used the key word. The key word in all of this is relationship. The most satisfying professional experiences, the most satisfying personal experiences are in the context of relationships. And the length of vision that you want to have over the long term of a relationship can be the next quarter, can be the next year, can be the next 5 years. But people will all feel better and all succeed more on every side of the negotiations if the relationship succeeds. And as Bruno says, in times of crises, that's when relationships can be made stronger, hopefully. And if not managed, they can become weaker.
To what extent do the panelists believe that effective project management can achieve efficiency and cost savings? And are there any specific examples that you might be able to share?
I mean, I absolutely, and I return back to the largest project I ever had to run. We spent a lot of time running in circles until we found one person who could actually manage it and put it together. So project management is a valuable skill that people study and improve on. I think that there's great value in project management, especially in large transactions or large litigations, and I think that you can save real dollars and improve everyone's experience if you project manage well.
I fully agree. Project management means actually nothing else that you take control that the project you are in, being a project like you described, Lon, or you run a mandate with an outside counsel. You just make sure that it doesn't get out of control, which causes either more fees which are generated, or you lose time because you have to do the double work again.
And the most important part of project management is not that you get from point A to point B in a straight line, which is the perfect project, but then when you start to veer off 10 or 15 degrees in one way or the other, the project manager keeps you within a range that allows you to recover and get to the goal easier.
How can you effectively partner with legal sourcing professionals to achieve these efficiencies, to make these things happen, to take a project management orientation? How would you guide that conversation to bring together the GC lens with the buying of legal services lens?
Depending on the tenure of the GC and how they've had experience, I mean, starting from the paradigm of a GC is new to this, the GC has to be encouraged to be open-minded. To a GC, that's to allow the procurement professionals to bring their value, or the project management professionals to bring their value. To the extent that a GC is more experienced in working with colleagues who do this, I think the importance is the appreciation is that things are always changing, that there are always new business models on the outside. And to be willing to experiment or to run tests or pilots where you take advantage of new opportunities and new providers.
Absolutely right. Go out and just take a pilot, train it, accept that your learning curve may be harmful, maybe as well, that you may not succeed with everything, but you have to do it anyhow. Because if you don't do it, then I fear that the pressure will come from the next C-level to the General Counsel, as it came when procurement was actually invited to assist the General Counsel, which actually, as an underline, means that the CFO at least didn't trust the General Counsel anymore to spend the money in the best interest of the company. So if a General Counsel is wise enough and tries now already, actually as a front runner, to implement it, he or she may get rid of the pressure which may come for sure.
Okay, then we'll tackle an open question. We're seeing the continued proliferation of legal operations, which is driving a wide variety of changes across legal departments. From what you're seeing, are those changes having a meaningful impact on efficiency and productivity?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. If you are, and it has a lot to do with the will of the General Counsels to accept that they are actually partnering with the next function. As long as they accept it still as a pressure and they are forced to use them and let them in, then it's difficult. If you can partner, yes. And I see it that the acceptance is increasing. Nobody is really surprised anymore. Law firms still don't like them maybe on the table because they talk about numbers all the time, but it doesn't come as a surprise anymore. I see that this is continuing with an increasing acceptance that it's part of the game.
I agree with that, and I think that things will continue to evolve, and it's an effort of new ideas, trying them out, picking the best ones, and not being afraid to abandon the ones that don't work.
If each of you could just provide a parting piece of advice for this audience in terms of the highest and best use of kind of their skill sets on driving efficiency and productivity.
I think I just say a very one sentence, because that's consistent with time and maybe consistent with the assignment. I think to take the lens to the greatest extent possible, nothing's perfect or 100%, but to the greatest extent possible, take the review of relationships over the view of transaction and think about how does this fit into a relationship, because a series of relationships is more beneficial for all the players than a staccato series of transactions.
I would add, if you would like to work on the efficiency line, try to work a little bit more with KPIs, accept them, play with them, be wise with them, because they will show you directly if you move the needle into one or the other direction. Do it yourself before you are forced to do it.
Very good. Thank the panelists and the audience.